Hey everybody, I'm Mike, and today Ron and I are taking on a project that's not only functional, but can totally transform the look and feel of your outdoor space.
That's right. Today's how-to workshop is all about building that garden wall. It's one of those how-to projects that really pays off. You can create raised garden beds, level out a sloped yard, or just add some structure and some personality to your landscaping.
And the best part, you don't need to be a professional mason to do this. With a little bit of planning, the right materials, and maybe an extra set of hands, this is a project you can tackle over a weekend.
Bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, it's a combination of digging, stacking, and a bit of fine-tuning. But once it's done, you've got a strong, attractive feature that adds real value to your yard. Whether you're trying to stop erosion, frame a planting area, or just clean up those yard edges, a garden wall can do all that and more.
Now, before we get started, let's talk about what a garden wall actually is, because it's not quite the same thing as a full-size retaining wall. Right, Ron?
Absolutely. That garden wall is basically a short retaining wall, usually 3 feet or less. It's designed to hold back soil, create levels in your yard, or build up a defined planting area. It's usually on the shorter scale, so it doesn't require any kind of special permits or engineering like a large retaining wall might.
So here's what to expect from this how-to workshop. We're going to walk you through the entire process step by step. That starts with planning and prep, then moves into digging a trench, setting a strong base, laying that all-important first course or level of blocks, and stacking your way up to a stable wall.
We're also going to show you how to cut the blocks, add drainage if needed, backfill for support, and finish things off with those top layers of capstones for a clean finished look.
After we walk through each step, we will go over all the tools and materials you'll need for the project.
And of course, we're going to answer some common questions. By the end of this workshop, you'll have the knowledge, the tools, and most importantly, the confidence to build a garden wall on your own. So throw on your work gloves, grab that tape measure, and let's get to it.
Yep. Before you do anything, this is critical, before you even pick up a shovel, the very first step is to call 811. It's free and it's nationwide. They'll come out to mark any underground utility lines. This is a must for any outdoor project that involves digging, even if it's a shallow trench.
Yep, absolutely. Safety first, always. While you're at it, this is a good time to check with your local building department to see if you need a permit. Some areas have rules about walls, heights, and materials, and of course drainage. And if you have that HOA, double check their guidelines too, because you don't want to be halfway through a project and find out that you're out of compliance.
You don't want to get that knock on the door. I've noticed your wall is out of compliance. Now that we've got that covered, let's get into the actual planning. Choosing and laying out the location of your garden wall is really the foundation for everything else. So take a little extra time to think it through.
Yes, absolutely. So for sure, before you even pull out that tape measure or think about digging, take a look at your yard and ask, what's the wall for? Are you creating a raised garden bed, leveling out your yard, or just adding structure and definition to your landscaping?
A great tip is to walk the area with a notebook or just snap a few photos. Look for low spots where you get water runoff or buildup, or bare patches on a hill that might be prone to erosion. Those are great places for a garden wall, both functional and aesthetic.
And this is where you also want to start thinking about drainage. When the soil behind the wall gets wet, it exerts pressure, a lot more than you might expect. You'll want to plan for a well-drained backfill material like gravel, and in some cases you may need to install drain pipe. More on that later, but it's critical to keep this in mind as you plan.
Real quick, Ron, just to emphasize how important that is, there's soil behind your wall and it has weight, right? But we all know how heavy water is. If you add water to the soil, what's it going to do? It's going to get heavier, right? So that's why that's a problem. You don't want the water staying behind the wall because it's going to be exerting that pressure. You want it to drain out.
You got to have a relief point for it.
Right. Now, once you've chosen the location, then it's time to measure the space and determine how many blocks you'll need. You can't dig the right trench until you know the size and height of your wall. That determines both the depth and width that you'll need.
So you're going to want to start by measuring the total length of your wall, then decide how tall you want it to be. Most garden walls fall into that 3 to 4 course range, but you can adjust based on your design.
And just to clarify, a course is one horizontal row of blocks. So your first course is the base, second course stacks on top of that, and so on until you reach your desired height.
Absolutely. Now, to figure out how many blocks you'll need, you can do it manually. You can divide the length of your wall by the length of a single block to get how many per course, then divide the total height by the height of a block to get your course count. Multiply those together and you've got your total. What?
Or, if you want to make it a little bit easier, and after that, who doesn't? Just go to homedepot.com. Most block product pages have a built-in calculator. You enter the length and height of your desired wall, and it tells you how many blocks you need. Easy as that.
Man, I tell you, I didn't know I needed to go back to high school algebra to build a garden wall. And from that same page, you can also add those blocks right into your cart and choose delivery or in-store pickup. But you just got to make sure to factor in the delivery time so your materials arrive before you start your project.
And here's another tip. Whatever number you get, order at least 10% more. Trust us, you'll want those extra blocks on hand for cutting mistakes that you might make, or if you need to replace a damaged piece down the line. Sometimes block styles or colors get discontinued. It's a lot harder to match those if you can't find the exact same block, so having some extras on hand makes a lot of sense.
You know, and really quick, if you have extra, that's always a good thing. It's not necessarily always about discontinued or need more for extra cuts, but you can multi-purpose that stuff. You can make benches out of it. You make small planters out of it. There's lots of cool stuff that you can do with that leftover material.
Yep.
Now, once you know how many blocks you need, you can go back to the physical layout. Start by marking your wall path using grade stakes and a mason's line. This helps you see the shape and the slope of your wall. Use a line level to make sure the mason's line is straight and even across the entire length. You'll ensure consistent depth of your trench by measuring down from the string with a tape measure in several spots. Your trench is level when the distance between the string and the bottom is the same along the entire length. You'll also use a level throughout the process to regularly confirm your trench is level as you dig.
Right, and Ron, one quick note on that. This is all true as far as the distance from the string to the trench if your ground is level. If your ground is not level, you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper to start with because you always want the wall level even if the ground isn't. So if that's the case, once you determine that level mark, you may have to dig a little bit further in one place to get it started because the ground is in the way and you're going to have to submerge some of that wall in order to keep it level. So just keep that in mind. Now, if your wall is going to curve or wrap around a bed, like a flower bed, this is where a can of ground marking spray paint comes in handy. Trace the shape directly onto the grass or soil so you can visualize the path before you dig.
You're also going to want to scan for obstacles, tree roots, drain lines, sprinkler head, that kind of thing. Plan around them so you're not surprised mid-dig.
And we can't say this enough. Always call 811 before you dig. They'll come out for free, mark underground utilities in your work area. That's a step you never want to skip. It's going to help you identify things. Even if you look, you may have missed something. So this is a way to be sure that you're not going to dig or cut into something important.
One time, again, for everybody out there, what is that number?
I believe it's 811, Ron.
Absolutely. Now, finally, if your wall is going to be over 3 or 4 feet tall, or if it's holding back a significant amount of soil, check with your local building codes once again. Some areas will require a permit or an engineering plan for taller retaining wall structures.
So to sum it up, call 811 first, check your local permit and HOA requirements, plan for drainage, choose your wall location, measure your space, calculate your blocks, order extra, and mark your path. All of that will make the next step, the digging, much smoother.
Totally. A good plan sets up for a solid build and fewer surprises along the way.
Now it's time to start digging. This step is all about building a strong foundation, and it starts with a solid, level trench.
This is where the real work begins. You might be tempted to just start stacking blocks on the ground, but don't do it. If your base isn't level, your entire wall is going to be crooked and unstable.
Start by grabbing a trenching shovel and begin digging along that line you just marked out. The trench needs to be deep enough to bury at least half of your first course of blocks. That's usually about 4 inches, plus another 3 inches for your paver base. A paver base is a firm, well-draining crushed stone or gravel layer beneath the wall that helps with leveling and drainage. It prevents settling and ensures wall integrity.
So depending on your block size, you're looking at a trench that is 7 to 8 inches deep. And don't forget the width. Front to back matters too. You're going to want a trench to be about twice the size or twice the width of a block. That gives you room enough to adjust and level out the base material.
And if your yard isn't flat, we talked a little bit about this earlier, let's be honest, most aren't, you might need to create little steps in your trench to accommodate the slope. This is super important if you want to top the top of your wall to stay nice and level. But this really only comes into play if you have a dramatic slope in your yard. It might require stair-stepping your wall gradually down the slope. Now earlier, Ron, we talked about if you have a slight slope, you can just dig part of the wall deeper into the ground. If you've got a dramatic slope, you don't want to bury 4 or 5 layers of wall, right? But you can stair step your wall down the hill and do it in sections where whole sections step down. So you're accommodating for the slope, but you're not burying half your wall.
Well, in a previous workshop, we installed a fence. And stair stepping is another method of installing a fence as well.
Okay.
It kind of works concurrently with different types of projects like that as well. So as you dig, keep checking the depth with a tape measure. You're going to want to make sure the trench is consistent all the way through. No high spots, no low spots. If you hit a rock or a root, take your time and clear it out completely. Next, level out the ground base by compacting the soil with a hand tamper or a jumping jack compactor, which you can rent from the Home Depot rental center. They compact dirt, and the tamping plate is thin enough to be ideal for small confined spaces like wall trenches. Do this before adding your paver base.
So real quick, Ron, if you're doing the tamping and you get really angry, would you call that a tamper tantrum? Maybe, maybe not. Once you've got your trench dug out and compacted, it's time to focus on the base. Start by pouring in about 3 inches of paver base. You can buy this in bags at Home Depot or by the pallet if you're doing a longer wall and need more.
So what you're saying, Mike, it's all about the base.
It is. It's all about the
right.
base.
So spread the base evenly, then compact it, once again using the hand tamper or the jumping jack compactor. You're also going to want the base to be as solid as possible because bottom line, everything is resting on the base.
Once it's compacted, pull out your levels again. Either a 4-foot or 6-foot level works great here. Set it in the trench along the entire length to make sure it's perfectly flat and level from end to end. But also check the level width from front to back. For this, you can use a smaller torpedo level. This is one of those steps where patience really pays off. If you rush through this, you'll spend way more time later on trying to adjust your blocks because you didn't start with a good level surface.
Totally. Getting the base right now means your wall will look level. It's not the flashiest part of the job, but it's one of the most important.
Yep. Once that trench is dug, filled, and leveled, you're ready to start laying your first course of blocks.
All right, everyone, this is a critical moment in the project because the first row is going to set the tone for everything that comes after.
If you rush this part and make digging or leveling mistakes, you'll be fighting with them every single block. So take your time here. This is where the wall really starts to come to life.
Now, you're always going to want to start at the lowest point of your trench if your wall has a slope. That's your anchor. If your wall is on flat ground, you can start at either end of your wall. Grab your first block, place it right on the center line of the trench, and check to make sure it's level in both directions, side to side and front to back.
And if it's a little bit off, don't worry. You can use that rubber mallet to tap it down gently or add a bit of paver base underneath the side that's maybe a little bit too low to raise it up. The key here is to get that first block sitting flat and solid.
Now, once the block is locked in, keep moving along the line one block at a time. Set each one next to the last one. Use your level to double check and make adjustments as you go.
Now, here's a tip. If your blocks have tabs or flanges on the bottom, which some do to help lock them in place, you might need to chisel those off on the first course so they sit flush on the base. You can do that with a masonry chisel and a hammer. Let me show you real quick what we're talking about. On the back of this block, can you see that little part that extends at the bottom? That's there to sit on. It has two purposes. It helps lock the block in place, but it also forces you to move it back just a little bit so that your wall is gradually leaning back as you build it up. Again, that's going to help it be sturdy. This is on the bottom of the block. If you just put that on the ground, it's not going to be level. So if you want to leave that there, you've got to dig a trench to accommodate for that. If you don't want to dig a trench, you've got to remove that and you can just chisel that off.
And again, you can dig or scrape a slight relief trench to accommodate the flange. I've got to tell you, I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to chisel off that back flange, but scraping or digging out that little relief trench is probably going to be your best bet. In fact, if you're using paver base anyway, you can just take your rubber mallet and smack it on the back of the actual stone on that first course and level it out that way. Bring the back down a little bit and then level it out. Be a whole lot easier than actually chipping it off. But we want to show you every possible way to take care of this. So that's kind of how we're going to roll with it. Now, before I get started in actually doing this, you want to make sure that you're completely safe. We're always safe here at Home Depot. So you're going to don a little, some safety gloves, majorly because number one, these bricks and these blocks can pinch you.
They're pretty rough.
They can pinch you. They're pretty rough, and you want to put a quick little set of safety gloves on. And you're always going to want to wear some kind of eye protection because, ladies and gentlemen, this stuff can come flying. Now, it's not necessary for me to personally have a dust mask on at this point because I'm not actually cutting the actual brick itself with, say, a grinder or a skill saw of some sort. So it's not going to kick up a whole lot of dust. But we are going to do this way. Mike, I want you to watch out, bud, because I do not want any of this to pop up into your face.
Yep. And real quick, Ron mentioned, we talked about digging a trench. You're not technically digging because it's paver base. You can just scrape a little ditch in there, small. And you're not going to ever see this because it's on the bottom in the back of the wall. So if you're doing what Ron's about to do and it comes off really unevenly, you don't have to worry about that. You're never going to see it. But if it's big chunks and it's really uneven and you get concerned, you can score this like we're going to show you later when you're cutting a block. You don't have to do that unless you just decide you want to.
And last but not least, if you really want to have that flange off there, it means that much to you, you can always get a grinder and grind it level. There's just more tools. There's always a tool for every job and a job for every tool. So let's get to it. So I'm going to take the little chisel. This is just a masonry chisel and just a heavy hammer, right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up here on the flange and I'm just going to tap it. And see how it just pops right off and flies completely across the studio. And that, my friends, takes that edge off. I'll go ahead and do the rest of it. But if you get in here close, you can see because it took some of the brick off here, it took some of the block off here because I chiseled off that flange. Now it's flat on the back, right? But if you don't want this, not that you're going to ever see it, I recommend just doing the actual quick scraping out of the paver base or tapping it down with the hammer itself.
Yeah, remember, this is a heavy job and you're lifting a lot of blocks. It's very physical. You don't need to necessarily add to the physicality of it by doing this when you can just easily make that trench. Again, more of this came off than we thought might. Not going to affect the structural stability of the wall, so don't worry about that. But again, just digging the trench is probably the easiest way to do this. As you're building out the course, you may notice some small angled gaps between the blocks. That's normal, but you still want to make sure that each one is tightly seated and level. Use the rubber mallet to nudge them into place.
Now, once you get to the end of that first row, you might have to trim a block to fit. Don't worry, we're going to go over cutting blocks a little later. For now, just mark it and set it aside when you're ready to cut it.
Now, Ron, real quick, I do want to mention the gaps that we just talked about. I want to show people what we're talking about. These are 2 blocks. You can see that these are angled on the back side. So as you sit these next to each other, there is a fairly large gap in the back. That's normal. That's what we're talking about. You want these to bump up against each other and to touch. There's always going to be a gap back here unless you're doing a rounded wall where that would disappear. But if it's straight, you're going to have that gap. You'll fill that in later with dirt and gravel. So just wanted to make sure that you understood kind of what we were talking about there. Now, after the first course is laid, you'll fill the space behind the blocks with gravel. This backfill gives the wall stability and helps prevent soil from settling or washing out over time. This will also fill the gaps between the blocks that we just mentioned.
Yep, pour that gravel right into that gap between your blocks and the dirt behind them. Then use a tamper to tap it down and compact it so that it helps with stability. It's also going to improve drainage, which is critical.
So, just to recap, start at the lowest point of your wall, lay 1 block at a time, level each one carefully, complete your first row or course, and backfill with gravel as you go. It's meticulous work, but this is literally the foundation of your entire wall.
Before we start stacking those additional courses, let's pause and talk about something that you're definitely going to need to do during the build, and that's cutting your blocks. Now, whether you're staggering courses, working around an angle, you're going to run into a spot where a full block just won't do.
Yeah, this is a must for garden walls. Since you're staggering blocks left to right, that's going to result in a half block being needed at the end of every other row. Luckily, you don't need fancy tools to make these cuts. Ron's going to show you the simple, classic way.
So this is the basic setup. You're going to need a solid, stable surface like a workbench or stacked blocks. Stacked blocks is probably the best bet because you're probably going to be outside and you're going to be on the ground. So stacking up a couple blocks to give that solid surface is probably the best way for you to go. You're going to need a masonry chisel. You're going to need a heavy hammer. And of course, you're always going to want to put on your safety gear, some gloves, some goggles. If you're cutting it with a power tool, we'll talk about that a little later, you're going to want to have dust masks. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use a straight edge to mark the cut line. I'm cutting this block in half right down the middle. If your block has a V notch on the back, let's show the customers the V notch real quick on the back. It's going to have a V notch on the back. Most of them are going to have that, right? It's built right in. It's a built-in break point, so use that as a guide. Now I'm going to score this line on all sides of the block, starting with the top, then down the sides, and then finally along the back. You don't need to dig too deep, just enough to create a consistent groove.
You can see that just a few firm taps, you're not trying to break it yet, just laying the groundwork for a clean split.
Now, once that groove is scored all the way around, now it comes to the break. I'm going to set the chisel right on that score line and give it a sharp, solid hit with my hammer. And there it is. A clean cut, no dust, no power tools. This method works great when you just need a few custom pieces for staggering your rows.
And one thing to mention about the cut, you'll notice that when you cut this, it's never a perfect line, right? It's kind of ragged and jagged. That's fine because the face of the blocks look like that anyway. So it doesn't hurt that the side, the new side that you just created, matches that look. So you're not really looking for a super clean cut necessarily. If you're working with harder blocks, building a really long wall, or just want a cleaner, more professional cut, you can step it up with a power tool, a circular saw or angle grinder fitted with a masonry blade. That's very important. This works well for straighter cuts.
Or for the cleanest cuts with minimal dust, you can rent a masonry saw from the Home Depot tool rental center. These are designed for that exact type of project. They'll give you a smooth, accurate result without the risk of the block breaking unevenly.
Whatever tool you use, again, safety first. Don't forget your safety gear. Respirator or dust mask, masonry dust is no joke, and you don't want that stuff in your lungs or your eyes.
And just as a reminder, don't rely on the old safety squint. Actual safety gear is non-negotiable when you're cutting stone or concrete. You definitely don't want to chunk a wall block in your eye.
Nope.
Okay, so as you can see, I've got the block scored straight down the middle. Now, the chisel does a pretty good job of scoring, but it takes quite a few hits in order to get a good score line. It will take a little bit more time for me to actually break this block. Now, if you're only doing 2 or 3, you could take your time and do it that way. But if you have a grinder with an actual attachment, like this one here, or an actual blade that cuts masonry, right? This is the way to go, because you're going to be able to score a whole lot deeper. So when you do hit it with the chisel, then the actual block will break a whole lot cleaner. Let me show you what I mean. So right here we have the one that I scored with the chisel. Now it did a pretty good score line, but it's going to take me a whole lot longer to bust it in half with the chisel. So I decided to go ahead and take the actual grinder, which you saw earlier, and actually grind a deeper score line in it on this one here. Now, when I cut this one or break this one, you'll see how much cleaner it is and how much easier it is to break. I highly suggest you doing this if you're going to be doing, I'd say more than 6 of these blocks, depending on how long your wall is. If not, then go the other route. It's just going to take you a lot longer, and it's going to be a lot more manual. So with that, I'll go ahead and break that one in half. Now, when you're breaking this in half, you always want to set it on its end, because that V line is the line that's the actual break line. So I'm going to take my chisel, I'm going to pop it in the little score line that we already have. I'm going to give it a couple taps, and it should break cleanly. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You've just cut the block in half.
All right, so just remember, you've got your first course in place. It's level, it's backfilled, and it's looking good. Now it's time to start building upward.
Yeah, this is absolutely where your garden wall starts to take shape. The key here is to stagger those blocks for strength and stability, just like you see in a brick wall.
If your first row started with a full block, your second row should start with a half block. Then you alternate between full and cut blocks as you work your way up the wall. If you want to look real quick, you can see we've got that here. Our tiny wall in the back here has a full block, a half block, and a full block. Same on this side. Full block, half block, and a full block. So you would repeat that all the way up.
And Mike, what that staggered pattern helps, it helps lock the structure together and keeps those vertical seams from lining up, which is super important for a strong wall.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that's the same process that you do with tile or flooring. You never want your seams lined up. It just makes for a weak point. You always want to stagger seams. It's the same with a wall. So before you set down the next course, go ahead and brush off the top of your first row. Dirt, gravel, and sand can keep the blocks from sitting flat, and that's going to throw off the level. So as you can see, look at this one. There's always stuff on the top of these blocks. You want to get all of that off before you start stacking up.
Now, I got to tell you, here's a question that we get a lot. Do I need to use adhesive between courses?
Well, the short answer is it's not required, but if you're using interlocking garden wall blocks, they're designed to stack without adhesive. We showed you that earlier. The weight of the blocks and the staggered pattern help keep everything in place. But
now I got to say something right now. If you're investing all this time and all this money and all this sweat equity into your home, why not spend a couple more dollars on some construction adhesive to make sure that wall will last the test of time? But this is important. If you're in that area where weather is a concern, or if the wall will be in a high traffic spot, or your blocks don't lock in tightly, we suggest using that landscape block adhesive or construction adhesive between rows for extra security, especially on that top course.
now, if you choose to use adhesive, and we definitely strongly advise you do that, definitely do a dry fit without adhesive. of your blocks first to ensure the alignment is correct before securing them to one another. If you're adding capstones to the top of your wall, you should definitely use adhesive to attach those. Just make sure the surfaces are clean and dry before applying it to make sure they adhere securely.
Now, as you lay out each course, keep an eye on that level. Don't assume just because that first course was perfect that the rest will follow suit. Check front to back and side to side as you go.
And if you run into a block that's sitting too high, give it a light tap with your rubber mallet. If it's too low, you can add a little bit of that base material underneath to raise it up a bit.
Yeah, you're going to want to backfill as you build. After every course, pour a little more gravel behind the wall, tap it down a little bit. This helps the wall handle the pressure from the soil and gives you a clean surface to keep building up.
So to recap, cut a block in half to stagger every other row. Clean off your blocks before stacking. Check the level regularly throughout. Dry fit before adhering any block to another block, and backfill as you go. Adhesive between the courses for additional stability and for the capstones is a must.
All right, now once you've got a few courses in place and you're adding height, this is a good time to address drainage. This is one of the most overlooked steps in a wall build, but it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, when rain or irrigation water builds up behind your wall, that's a lot of pressure pushing on those blocks. Without good drainage, that wall could start to lean, bulge, or even fail over time.
I gotta say, man, it's not a question of whether it will,
If.
because it will.
Not if, but when, yeah.
If but when, I guess that's the way we say
Yeah.
it. So here's what we need to do. If you're in an area that gets a lot of rain, or if your wall is over a couple feet tall, go ahead and install a perforated drain pipe behind the base of the wall. Think about this before you start the project, because you'll need to add this behind the second row of blocks and add a base layer underneath the pipe for additional drainage.
Use a flexible corrugated drain pipe like the one that you see behind us with a drain sock or a filter fabric around it. That's going to keep soil from clogging up the pipe over time. Lay the pipe down in a bed of gravel right behind the blocks and make sure it has a slight slope toward a safe drainage area, like the edge of your yard or a French drain. This ensures water drains away from the area and doesn't just sit in the pipe. So as you can see, we have some of this drainage pipe behind us, and it is perforated throughout with small holes. What happens is that allows the water from the soil to seep into the pipe, and then if you've got it angled right, it's going to drain away from the wall, which is what you want.
At the end of the day, you just want to let gravity do its work. That's what that's
Absolutely.
for. Then cover that pipe completely with gravel. You're going to want to fill in that space behind the wall up to a few inches below the top of your final course to create a well-drained backfill zone.
If you live in a drier climate, you might be able to skip the pipe and just use gravel backfill. That's going to help get water out of there as well. Either way, the goal is to let the water flow through and drain away safely instead of building up behind the wall. And if you do use a drain pipe, make sure the end is left open and directed toward a safe outlet so water can exit cleanly. Real quick, we did mention if you live in a wet area, it's really important, but if you're going to landscape behind your wall, if you're going to have flower beds and all kinds of things back there, you're going to be watering that. So you're going to be adding water all the time, even if you live in a dry area. So again, if there's a lot of water, regardless of where it comes from, you want to consider the drainage pipe. All right, once your wall is stacked to its final height and you've installed any drainage pipe that you need, it's time to complete your backfill. This step is what locks everything together and gives your wall long-term stability.
And backfilling isn't just about filling a hole, it's strategic. You're building out support behind the wall while you're also giving water a way to flow through instead of pulling up. That's the combination that keeps your wall from shifting, sinking, or pushing out over time.
Right. You'll want to start with gravel or crushed stone. Pour that material into the gap that's left behind your wall at this point. That's the space between the back of the blocks and the excavated slope you've cut earlier. Fill in a few inches at a time and work your way up gradually.
And as you add those layers, stop every few inches and tap them down. You can use a hand tapper if you're working in a small area, or a rented jumping jack compactor If you're doing a longer wall, compacting the wall as you go is critical because it eliminates air pockets and will prevent the ground from settling later on.
Right? If you just dump in all your gravel and walk away, that gravel will settle over time and leave dips. You're likely to see the walls start to shift after a big rain or once the soil starts to settle and compact on its own. So go slow, layer it up, and tamp it down a little at a time. You also don't want to fill it up and tamp just at the top because you will have looser gravel at the bottom. It's going to settle over time.
Absolutely. Now, once you've filled and compacted up to just a few inches below the top of the wall, that's when you're going to want to switch materials. If you're planning to grow grass, flowers, or shrubs in that area, lay down a well-draining topsoil mix to finish it around 12 inches deep.
If you're not planting, really any ground cover like mulch is a great option. It helps with weed control and still looks polished. But either way, whatever you put on top should support the function of the wall, not weigh it down or trap water.
And here's a tip. Slope that finished grade away from the wall about an inch or two over the next couple feet. That prevents water from running towards your wall and creating unnecessary pressure behind it.
So think of this whole step as an important part of drainage, which again helps with overall reinforcement. A good backfill job means your wall won't just look good, it'll last. So again, build up with gravel or crushed stone in layers, compact it as you go, and top it off with either mulch or soil based on your landscape plan. Get that right and you're in good shape.
Now that the wall is built and backfilled, we're down to the last step, installing those capstones. This is where the whole project comes together to get that finished look.
Yeah, you know, the capstones aren't just decorative. They are decorative, but they also protect the top of the wall from weather, resulting in a longer lasting wall and just make it look finished. And today I'm going to show you exactly how to secure them using a strong landscape block adhesive.
Now we're using a landscape block adhesive, which is the go-to for these kind of projects. They're designed specifically for outdoor use. They hold up against the elements and they grab quickly, but still give you a little time to adjust the blocks before the adhesive completely dries.
So here's how easy this is. I've got a capstone and a wall block here to show you just how strong the adhesive is. Thank you, Ron. I'm going to apply a generous bead along the top side of the wall block. Now you can do this a lot of different ways. You can go back and forth in straight lines. You can do kind of an S pattern like I'm doing. As long as you have a good, consistent bit of the adhesive and it's in all the different areas, you're good to go.
And everyone, just so you know, this stuff is a little harder to come out of the caulk gun, so you're going to want to make sure that you cut the end off the actual adhesive tube a little bit more than you would if you were actually just putting in caulk.
Now, to create a good grip, you take the capstone and you press it firmly into place. Now, one thing you want to make sure you do, you always want your capstones overlapping a bit. Again, that's going to help water from gathering and hitting the top of the stone, and you want to press that firmly into place.
And if you kind of have an idea of where you're going to be putting it at, just line up the back of the capstone with the back of the block, and that will give you the appropriate overhang.
Yep. And you can see, I'm moving this around a bit. The great thing about this adhesive, you do have time to make small adjustments. You do want to do your dry fit. You do want to get an idea of where these go before you start adhering, but you've got time to make small adjustments. You know, you want to look at it, make sure that the overhang is the same on both sides. And it's going to line up pretty close to the front, but you've got a gap in the back because of that angle that we talked about earlier. But look at that. It's got what's called instant grab. It's not dry, it's not cured yet, but it's already grabbing, and these blocks are heavy, so that just gives you an idea of how strong that adhesive is. It does a great job. So obviously you'll want to let it cure fully before putting any kind of weight on it, but for alignment and placement, it does give you confidence right away.
Now, the nice thing is that even though it grabs quickly, like Mike showed you, you still got a couple of minutes to slide the blocks into position before the adhesive begins to set. So if you need to make any micro adjustments for spacing or angle, you've got the time.
Yep. And if I slide these blocks a bit, as you saw when I was adhering it, you'll see they move you can still move them a bit. That flexibility is really helpful, especially when you're working around curves or corners and need to get your angles just right. Another thing to keep in mind, we only did the underside because we're only doing one block. If you're doing a series of these, which you would be doing, you also probably want to put some on the side as you start to meet the capstones to each other.
Now, when you're out at your wall, you're going to want to dry fit your capstones first. Lay them out to see how they're going to line up. If you need to cut any, just do the same method as we covered earlier. Then apply adhesive to one block at a time, press into place, and move down the line.
And again, you want your capstones to overhang the face of the wall by about 1 to 1.5 inches. That little lip helps shed away water from the face of the wall, which protects it from staining and erosion.
Now, you're going to want to give the adhesive about 24 hours to fully cure before doing any heavy work around the wall, like planing or adding weight near the edge. Check the cure time on the product label just to be safe.
Real quick, we talked about how important it is to clean off your blocks as you're stacking them throughout the process. It's really important at the top. Think about this. You've got your wall finished. You're starting to fill in with the gravel. You're tamping. There's going to be dust and little, pieces of gravel probably bouncing around. You don't want any of those on top of this wall before you add the capstones. So make sure, absolutely, brush that off really good before you start this process.
Another thing you need to consider is like when you're dry fitting, make sure it's cleaned off, but throw a level on it.
Yep.
From block to block. Make sure it's nice and level because that finished look is what you're desiring to have. If you have like one that's a little off, it's going to look a little wonky all the way down.
And we can't stress the dry fitting enough, because what you don't want to do is start adding them and hearing them. Once it starts to dry, you notice that you're off 1 or 2 inches. Well, guess what? There's not much you can do about it at that point. So you definitely want to dry fit these and make sure that you're on track before you start securing them permanently. And one more tip, if you're installing on a hot day, try to shade your work area or maybe work early in the morning. Extreme heat can cause the adhesive to skim over too quickly, and you might lose some of that adjustment time.
Absolutely, it's going to cure a little faster. So that's it. The last block is in place. Everything is locked down and your wall looks clean and custom built.
So you've built a wall that's strong, stylish, and built to last.
Now, when it comes to garden walls, there are several different types to choose from, and each serves a different purpose, depending on the size of your project, the terrain, and the look you're going for.
Yeah, and for most do-it-yourselfers, segmental garden walls like the one that we've demonstrated are a great starting point. These are built using those interlocking concrete blocks that stack without mortar. They're designed to be user-friendly, and you can find all sorts of styles, colors, smooth face, split face, textured, even natural stone looks.
And the nice thing about segmented walls is they come with the built-in features like the lips and the flanges on the back of the blocks that help lock each course together and slightly angle the wall back. They're strong, simple to install, and perfect for landscape beds, small terraces, gentle slope corrections, typically up to around 4 feet without any additional engineering.
Now, if you're building a wall that's purely held together by weight, that's called a gravity wall. These use heavy blocks or stone to push back against the pressure of the soil. You'll find these in small to mid-sized yard projects where you want a little more mass and don't need any reinforcement.
Next up, if you're building a bigger wall, something say over 4 feet tall, or need to support a driveway or a slope, you're looking at a cantilevered wall. These use reinforced concrete that's shaped kind of like an L.
Now, those options do require a lot more planning and often permits or engineering sign-off. So if you're doing a home project, you'll usually stick to segmental or gravity styles, but it's good to know your options.
Yeah, especially if you're near water or waterfront installations or tight spaces where you can't dig much. There's something called a sheet pile wall. These use interlocking panels made of steel, vinyl, or wood that are driven straight into the ground. Super useful for marine or flood zone installations.
And then there are gabion walls. You've probably seen these in modern landscaping or maybe roadside projects. They're made from wire mesh cages that are filled with stone or gravel. They look rugged, but they're excellent for erosion control and have this kind of industrial aesthetic that a lot of designers love. I actually love those. I've seen those at some hotels. Again, you see them along the interstate sometimes. I think they're really cool.
Each style has its own purpose, but for most backyard projects, segmental retaining wall blocks are most accessible, affordable, and an adaptable option.
You can find a wide range of them at the Home Depot. Some even have integrated cap pieces that match, so your wall looks seamless from base to top. Plus, a reminder, online you'll find product pages with the wall calculators that we talked about earlier to help you figure out how many blocks you need based on the height and length of your wall.
And don't forget to match the block type with your soil and slope. Heavier duty blocks may be worth an investment if you're working in clay soil or a high moisture area.
And when it comes to tools for building a garden wall, you really don't need a massive collection of tools, but the right ones make a big difference. First up, you're definitely going to want a trenching shovel. It's narrow, long, and designed for digging out even trenches, much easier than using a standard shovel. You'll use that to get your first course sitting nice and low. Once that trench is in, you'll need a hand tamper. That is just basically a heavy flat plate on a pole. You'll use it to compact your base material, and that helps create the strong, stable foundation that we've been talking about. It won't shift over time. And remember, for larger jobs, you may want to rent a thinner jumping jack compactor. After that, you're going to be using your levels a lot. I always bring a 4 or 6 foot level for the long sections of the wall as you work your way down, a line level attached to a mason's line for a big picture grading, and a torpedo level for individual blocks. I like the torpedo because it's small and accurate.
Now you're also going to want a rubber mallet, probably the tool I most often use on this kind of job. For layout, get yourself some grading stakes, mason's line, and a can of ground marking spray paint. Those tools help you plan out the wall's path, straight or curved, before you start digging. It's a big time saver. And when you have to cut blocks, you'll need a masonry chisel, a hammer for basic splits. For cleaner or angled cuts, a masonry saw or angle grinder with a diamond blade is the way to go. Now the Home Depot rental center has great options if you don't want to purchase one.
Real quick, we talked about the rubber mantle. You don't want to just use a regular hammer like this. This is going to damage the wall block. If you're trying to make adjustments, you're going to chip it, you're going to damage it. You don't want that. The rubber mallet obviously gives a bit, so it's going to help you make adjustments without damaging the wall block. Very important. Now that you know what tools you'll need, let's talk materials. Starting with the obvious, you'll need garden wall blocks. These come in a variety of styles, colors, and textures. For most projects, we recommend the segmental retaining wall blocks. Beneath those blocks, you need a solid foundation, and that starts with paver base. This is just a coarse, crushed stone that creates a firm bed underneath your first course and helps with drainage. You lay it, tamp it, level it, and that's what everything else sits on. After that, you'll need gravel for backfill. Gravel promotes drainage behind the wall. On top of the backfill, you can finish with topsoil and mulch if you're planting, and just mulch if you're looking for a clean, polished look and don't plan to plant.
And Mike, let's not forget safety. Safety first. Pack gloves, safety goggles, and dust masks. There's a lot of lifting, dust, and rough edges, so stay protected while you work. Everything we mentioned is available at homedepot.com.
All right, let's take a minute to answer some of the most common questions that we get when it comes to building a garden wall. Okay, first up, do you need to check with your city or county before building your wall?
Yeah, that's a big yes. Always call 811 before you dig. We've said it 3 or 4 times during the actual workshop. It's free, and it'll let you know if there are any buried utilities. If your wall is over 3 or 4 foot tall, there's a good chance that you may need a permit or even an engineering approval, depending on where you live. And don't forget to check with that homeowners association, because those rules and bylaws matter. If you have one, some HOAs have height limits or material guidelines that could affect your design.
And you don't want that knock on the door once your wall is complete.
That's right. So the next question we have is, does the foundation really matter that much, Mike?
Yeah, it really does. It matters a lot. Your wall is only as good as what it's sitting on. It is literally the foundation. If your base isn't level, the wall won't be level. It can shift, it can lean, even crack over time. A well-compacted, level base with the right depth and material, like paver base, is critical to getting a strong, long-lasting build. Spend more time on the first course than you think you need. It'll pay off big time as you build up. Next question. Why are garden walls built to lean back slightly?
Mike, that's a great question. That slight backward tilt is called a batter. It's built in to help the wall resist lateral pressure from the soil behind it. Even just a few degrees back can make a big difference in stability. A lot of interlocking blocks are designed with that built-in batter. So when you stack them, the angle happens automatically. It's a smart little feature that helps your wall hold up better over time. Okay, here's the big one. What do I do if I'm building a wall in a wet area or a place that floods easily?
Well, Ron, you definitely need to plan for drainage. We've talked about it several times. If you're in a wet area, you should use gravel backfill behind the wall to help move water away from the wall. And for walls over 2 feet, or if the soil stays wet, you'll want to add a perforated drain pipe behind the base of the wall, wrapped in landscape fabric to keep it from clogging. That drain pipe should slope slightly and lead to a safe outlet, like a French drain or a drainage ditch. If water builds up behind the wall, you're putting a lot of extra pressure on the blocks, and that can cause bowing or failure over time. One more question. How do I know which blocks to use?
Wow, that's going to depend on the height of your wall, the style that you want, and the function. For most garden walls, think 3 foot or under for segmental retaining wall blocks. They're perfect. They interlock and they come in a variety of colors and styles. They're made to be stacked without mortar. If you're working on a steep slope or need something taller, you may need to look at reinforced systems with geogrids or even hire a pro. A geogrid is a flexible synthetic mesh that goes behind the wall and reinforces the soil behind the wall, increasing its stability. But for most backyard projects, stick with those interlocking block systems. They're engineered to be easy to work with.
Last thing, if you're still unsure about anything, or if you've got a question about your specific garden wall project, you can always email us at workshopslive@homedepot.com. We are here to help.
Yep. In our stores, the Pro Desk team can help walk you through the material options, estimates, and even help you rent the right tools for the job.
All right, Ron, let's wrap it up. You now know that building a garden wall is all about taking it step by step. You start with a plan, you choose the location, you check for utilities, measure the space, and lay out your wall using stakes and line.
Then it's all about digging that trench. After that, you're laying that first course of block, backfilling with gravel, then starting to stack those next rows and staggering your joints using that wall block adhesive.
Next, when you're cutting blocks, just be safe. Wear eye and ear protection and use a respirator if you're cutting with a saw. One real quick note about cuts. The wall behind us is short, but if you'll notice, there are only 2 cut blocks. Even if this wall was a mile long, it would still only have 2 cut blocks because there's a full block at the top and bottom. So we talked about the cutting, we talked about how hard it can be, but even in a higher wall, you're likely to maybe only have 4 cut blocks because they're only at the end and they're every other level. So even though the cutting is important, you're not going to do a ton of it. So just keep that in mind.
We covered how to install a perforated drain pipe and gravel behind the wall, tampering it down a bit through each course.
Then the finishing steps, backfilling, topping off with topsoil or mulch, and capping your wall with capstones.
Now, when you step back and look at that finished wall, you're not just seeing blocks and gravel. You're looking at something that you built with your own 2 hands. It's a functional upgrade to your yard and a project that adds curb appeal and long-term value.
And hey, don't feel like you need to buy every single tool to get started. Many of the tools that we talked about today, including the masonry saw and the compactors, are available to rent from the Home Depot Tool Rental Center. It's a great way to get pro results without committing to a full garage of gear that you may never use again.
Absolutely. Look, you want to plan ahead, work smart, and take your time. If you do that, you'll end up with a garden wall that's strong, stylish, and built to last.
If you want to dive into other outdoor projects or brush up on your skills, head to homedepot.com/workshops for how-to and hands-on guidance.
Remember, whether you're building a small garden wall, a large landscape feature, or just exploring what's possible in your space, the Home Depot is here to help you do more and do it with confidence.
So with that, thank you for joining us today for this garden wall workshop. Good luck with your project, and as always, thank you for shopping at the Home Depot. We'll see you next time.